Sunday after Pentecost. We will be gathering on August 1st, Sunday, August 1st this week. I cannot believe that it is already August. That is nuts. It will not be August when you listen to this yet, though, so hold on to the July vibes as long as you can. This 10th Sunday after Pentecost is following on the heels of Christmas in July here at All Saints, but in the regular scheme of things, what we skipped over was the text about Jesus feeding the 5,000 from John's Gospel. So that is where our Gospel text kind of continues today, and we are entering into that wonderful, joyous time in the lectionary year, which is bread season. Many, many, many weeks of bread. So you'll catch a theme over the next few weeks as we go into August as well. Our intro from Sundays and these seasons for today is apparently not satisfied by Jesus's feeding of thousands. Some who were there to press him for a sign of his power, perhaps it is daily manna they want. As always in John's Gospel, when people want a sign, Jesus offers himself. He is the bread come from heaven to give life to the world. He calls us to come to him and believe in him, and through that relationship to know the one who sent him. So we are going to begin today in Exodus, and Pastor Rebecca, take it away.
I love Exodus.
Yay!
Yeah, well, this is our story. This is where, thank you so much for your sermon on Sunday, the supporting cast. They're all labeled and listed, and we can see them in that whole wonderful group of folks. But I need to step back 2 weeks ago very briefly. Jules asked about the daily prayers. And so, Pastor Jules, they are Shachrit, the morning prayer, Mincha, the afternoon prayer, evening, the Ma'ariv. Now, back to Exodus. And Exodus follows us. Exodus is a defining moment in the identity of the Jewish people. As the Lord who brought us out of Egypt with a strong arm and a mighty hand. Only Jeremiah interrupts that. And that was also 2 weeks ago, where Jeremiah said, it will no longer be said, as the Lord who brought Israel out of the land of Egypt, but as the Lord lives who brought out and led offspring from the house of Israel out of the land of the north. But other than Jeremiah's prophecy of the righteous branch, the identification of the people of Israel is the Exodus. And we're at the beginning of the story. This is our story. Exodus 1 taught, well, it's the funniest chapter in the Bible, but that's if you know Hebrew narrative. Exodus 2, all about the daughters, powerful piece. And it's a pun on the word for daughter, bat. Exodus 3, the remarkable holy name for God comes in. The name we don't pronounce, YHWH, comes in as Moses at the burning bush. And then 4 through 12, we've got all the plagues and the celebration of the Passover. 13, of course, the Lord goes before the people as a pillar of fire by night and as a cloud by day. The walking through the sea as Moses stretches his hand out. 15, the victory of the sea. And here we are in Exodus 16, part of our story. And the people are complaining. After all the miracles, the people are complaining. And Moses and Aaron keep sending them back to the miraculous deeds of the Lord, because that's what this whole book is about. Exodus 16. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then the Lord said to Moses, I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not. And 5 through 8 get left out where the Lord gives instruction, and indeed the people don't quite follow it. Verse 9, then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of Israelites, draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining. And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud. In the cloud, the Lord spoke to Moses and said, I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." And I am going to read the next 5 verses because this brings it absolutely into our lives this day. And this is what the Lord commanded: gather as much as each of you needs, an omer to a person, according to the number of the persons, all providing for those in their own tents. Then the Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing left over. Those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed, and Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they didn't listen to Moses. Some left a part of it until morning, and it bred worms, and it became foul. And Moses was angry with them. I like the whole section. And one of the reasons I like this, as we're kind of coming out of COVID, this brings up the hoarding. God said, there is enough. God of the walking through the sea, the pillar of cloud by day, the fire by night, the miracle of getting the slaves and all the diverse people to be allowed to leave Egypt, of bringing sweet water, and they did not listen. So fear leads to things like hoarding and distrust of God. And I like that these verses are here, for we have and are in some cases still living them. Trust in the Lord. The fear of the wilderness, which is a strange and frightening place. God opens so much for them, but they've left the things that are familiar, and they're afraid. And during this journey of these strange and diverse people, those who were called the Hebrews immigrants, people with nothing, slaves who gathered other displaced people and became a people in the wilderness with God's lead, God's provision, and the understanding of the righteousness and the grace of the one God. As they go through the trials in the rest of the book of Exodus, they're going to learn about the mercy of God, that the wilderness is no longer a terrifying place, but a place that shines with the extraordinary power of God. And then in verse 10, as we're reminded, Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of Israelites. They looked towards the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud. The people's attention is being turned from Egypt to the glory of God, who will now lead them, not just through the wilderness, but through whatever is going to come thereafter. And that fun piece that Tanner and I learned and Jules learned in God's school, manhu, what is it? Actually, it's man, what he, because there is no it in Hebrew. So what he became, what is it? Manhu is mana. And Jesus is going to quote that in John, as Tanner will lead us into. This story is a foundation story of the Israelite people and those of us who are adopted into that line. It becomes our story as well. How God not only leads through the wilderness, but transforms the wilderness into a place of peace and community with one another in the shelter of Almighty God. So remember Jeremiah's prophecy, one who will come who is the righteous branch. And that one is who we identify, of course, as Jesus. And Jesus will stand before the people in front of them as they bring up the bread in the wilderness. And Jesus is standing right there in front of them, remembering and reminding them that this is from the Lord their God. I love these texts, Tanner. I just love these texts.
Absolutely. This Exodus text is one of my favorites. I am glad that you added those last 5 verses, because that was going to be my addition. The lectionary. No. Just to point out that the lectionary skips over the failures of the Israelites in this particular passage, and that hoarding and distrust. I think that's an important piece of this story. That when God provides abundantly still our impetus is to hoard and to distrust. And I think that it's important as part of the Exodus story because that comes out so strongly in the John text for today as well from our gospel. It's really a piece of that understanding in history. So cool. Thank you. Do you want to look at the psalm as well?
I do, because interestingly, that theme is carried powerfully through Psalm 78, all 72 of its verses. And no, I won't. I promise. Just the ones assigned today are Psalm 78, 23 through 29. But the theme of God's grace in the presence of the people's disobedience, scaredness, mostly distrust of God. Psalm 78 is written, the first 8 verses are an introduction, but then there are 2 separate sections of the psalm, and they completely echo one another, which is the Hebrew way of saying, this is a repeat, pay attention. And according to McCann, each of those 2 solid sections, and we're in the first, describes God's gracious activity, describes the rebellion of the people, describes God's anger and judgment, and then describes the restoration and the relationship of the people with God. Psalm 78 begins with and ends with the goodness of the God for the people in spite of the people's continued disobedience. This section actually starts that way, but they've left out the opening of the section, which talks about God's anger, and the close of this section, which also talks about God's anger. But the piece that we've got, starting with verse 23, yet God commanded the skies above and opened the doors of heaven. He rained down on them manna to eat, gave them the grain of heaven. Mortals ate of the bread of angels. God sent them food in abundance, caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power led out the south wind. God rained flesh upon them like dust, winged birds like the sand of the seas. He let them fall within their camp and all around their dwellings. And they ate and were filled, for he gave them what they craved. The last part of that section talks very seriously about the anger of God rising against them because of their disobedience. Nonetheless, God rains the what from heaven? The bread from heaven. And the people eat and are satisfied. And in spite of the rebellion and in spite of the anger, God begins and ends this psalm with God's mercy and grace. The psalm was written, the multisyllabic word is hortatory. It means it was written not just historical, it's certainly a historical psalm. But then as you step into the history, you understand about God's grace restoring the people. It's a way to convince the folks to come back to the Lord their God. Thanks, Tanner. Didn't want to leave Psalm 78.
No, I love that. And we had talked about that before, but it's nice into your lectionary texts where everything is connected. All of the texts for this week are connected, and that doesn't always happen. It doesn't often happen, and so it's nice when they're all connected. And I think that that your points to that are just perfect, because that is the echo that we hear throughout not only the Hebrew scriptures, but well into the New Testament as well. This idea that God provides, the people mess up, God is angry, but God continues to provide. That the promises of God endure, that the mercy of God is so much greater than anything else. And that is the reminders that we get from so many of these psalms, that even when things are terrible, the psalmists cry out to God. In so many of these psalms, still they settle back into this certainty that God is there and God is with them and that God walks with them. And that's the beauty of our scriptures, is this constant refrain of God's presence and power in it. So thank you, Pastor Rebecca. That was delightful.
Thank you, Pastor Tanner.
Our gospel text for this Sunday is John chapter 6, verses 24 through 35. I'm going to add 22 and 23 to this week, because I think that it helps with a bit of the background. Otherwise, it starts kind of suddenly. So John chapter 6, starting at verse 22. The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the other side of the sea saw that there had been only one boat there. They also saw that Jesus had not got into the boat with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone away alone. Then some of the boats from Tiberias came near the place where they had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. So, when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there beside the sea, they themselves got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? And Jesus answered them, Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal. Then they said to him, What must we do to perform the works of God? Jesus answered them, This is the work of God, that you believe in him who he had sent to you. So they said to him, What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Then Jesus said to them, Very truly I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And they said to him, Sir, give us this bread always. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Sorry, I found a couple of words that I had skipped over earlier that now I think are going to get inserted into something. So I had to start real quick. All right, so there's a lot of great stuff in this text, and as with most of the stories in John's gospel, there is an abundance of detail that connects story to story to story, sometimes in rather disjointed ways that you may not catch if you haven't sat down and just like read all of John at once, kind of thing. So my thoughts are a little disjointed still on this, but I blame the gospel writer for that. So a little background first. This, as I mentioned in the beginning, follows right on the heels of the feeding of the 5,000 earlier in John chapter 6. And then, so Jesus feeds the 5,000. There's all the baskets left over. All of that happens. And then the people are so excited that they want to make him king. And they're very, very, very excited about this. And they are gathering closer and closer. And they're like, Jesus is like, these people are going to rush me and try to force me to be king. And so he and his disciples withdraw. And they basically like hightail it out of there and go and hide for a bit until it gets dark outside. And then they come down from the mountain and they go back to their boats. And Jesus puts his disciples on one of the boats and sends them out across the sea. And he stays back a little bit. And then we get the story of a storm and the disciples are sinking. And Jesus suddenly appears out of the storm, walking on the water. And we get this beautiful moment of Jesus with Peter and the faithfulness and the faithlessness and all of that sort of thing. And Jesus gets in the boat and they continue on to the other side of the sea. All right. And then this is all in John chapter 6. This is a very, very dense chapter of John. And then the crowd of 5,000 that had been fed the day before wake up. They realize that one of the boats is gone, but Jesus's boat is still there, but that Jesus isn't there. And they're trying to figure out how he got away. When a few other boats from Tiberias show up, and they all hop on these boats and decide to go and chase after Jesus and his disciples. They get across the sea. They hear the story about the walking on the water bit, and then we pick up with where we're at. All right. So the crowd has just witnessed this miracle. They have been fed to bursting on bread and loaves and all this wonderful stuff, and heard the story that Jesus walked on water and stilled the storm, which is all very awesome. And now they find Jesus, and the first thing that they do is they ask for more food. And the way that they do this is important, because the way that they do this is quid pro quo, right? They say, what do we have to do to get more bread? And Jesus says, believe. And then they say, well, give us a sign and then we'll believe. And Jesus says, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. And he talks to them about Moses and the bread in the desert and how God provided the manna and how there will be bread for everyone forever. And the people are like, we're on board with this, free bread all the time, never going to go hungry. Show us this bread. And Jesus says, hi, I'm right here. I am the bread. And the people are like, we don't like metaphors. What is going on? So that's this text in a nutshell. And it echoes really delightfully the story from John chapter 4, which is Jesus and the Samaritan woman, which, just as a little aside here, if you haven't heard Vicar John talk endlessly about John chapter 4 and the story of the Samaritan woman, I highly recommend that you go back through our archive and find a video of it, because he loves this particular text. So it's just delightful. But as Pastor Rebecca just mentioned, talking about Exodus and the Psalm, when stories repeat, you are supposed to be paying attention. And so I think that we can pretty easily carry that over to an accuracy within John's gospel as well. When you get these major themes that repeat, they're important and you should pay attention to them. So in the story of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman, we have similar echoes in the sense that Jesus goes, he's sitting next to the well, and he offers this woman living water. And she goes, you don't have a bucket. How are you going to get water out of this well? And Jesus says, I am the living water. This is who I am, and I will provide living water. And she says, just like the people in this crowd say, give us this bread always, she says, give me this water always. And then his response is, I am the living water, right? This is who I am. And so in chapter 4, it's Jesus as the living water. In chapter 6, it is Jesus as the bread of life. And in both stories, we have people demanding what is already in front of them, desiring what Jesus has already provided them. Jesus is already right there in front of them. All they have to do is just accept that, right? But it's hard for the people in both of these stories to accept the fact that they already have what they most desire. They're looking for a transactional relationship with God. And it comes down to, we will do these things if you do these things for me, right? We will believe in you, Jesus, if you show us these signs, sort of thing. And Jesus is very clear that that is just absolutely not how it works, that faith is not transactional. And he is going to put a stop to that very much quickly through these texts. So Jesus's focus here is this reality that the food that he is providing is not for those who can afford it or for those who feel like they can exchange something for it, but it is food for those who are willing to participate in God's ministry of abundant life for all of the world. And what does that mean? Well, I found this lovely quote from a gal whose name is Elizabeth Gray King. And when we talk about faith and belief in John's gospel, and we talk about these things that Jesus is going on about, I think that this gets to the heart of it. She said, we can believe in justice as a thing. We can believe in love and care and kindness and humility. But until we start living and acting as love, living out that care, graciously spilling over with kindness and working with others in humility as compared to power, a belief is just a belief, almost an object to be admired. Believing in resurrection is okay. Living resurrection is quite another thing.
Nice.
Faith, yeah, right? Isn't that delightful? Faith is an action. Belief is an action. And to underscore that, John, in the entirety of his gospel, never uses a noun form for the word faith or belief. He only uses verb forms of faith and belief, which is so cool, right? But it underscores this idea that Jesus is inviting people into continuing active faith again and again and again. And so the words we get are like, come to faith, which we see in our text today, or have faith or believe. I mean, it's not that it's always verbal, it's always active and actionable. And Jesus is always telling people that this is an ongoing life-giving process that you are constantly a part of, not something that you just passively receive. It is an active, engaged piece of your life. And so one of my favorite sayings that many of you have heard is, my talk talks and my walk talks, but my walk talks louder than my talk talks, right? That what we say matters, but that what we do matters so very much more. That we show up, we do good, we be kind, that those are all active pieces of our lives, that is how our faith engages in the world. And what I want to be careful with here and clarify is that does not lead to transactional ministry, right? Like living out this faith, being active in faith, this verbal belief that we have is not, we don't do this so that we can get something from God, right? We don't do this so that we can receive forgiveness from Jesus. We don't say, church, if you do this, I will give this. Or God, if you do this, I will do this, right? That's not how it works. And I have one more rather lengthy quote from you, and it's from a gentleman named Benjamin Sparks. I just think that it hits at this idea really well. And then I have a story for you. Sparks writes, we are accustomed to inviting people into the community of faith for all the wrong reasons, for the right kind of worship, for political engagement on behalf of the poor and downtrodden, for the sake of a Christian America, for a strong youth and family ministry, for the opportunity to practice mission in a downtown location, or to go on mission trips to Africa or Central America. Yet, what we have to offer in Christ and by Christ and because of Christ, first and foremost, is soul food, which lasts forever and does not change with the changing circumstances of the church or the world. It is soul food that we desire, and soul food in which we will rejoice long after our bellies are full of rice and our lives know justice in a free society.
Wow.
It is not the bread, the physical bread, that Jesus wanted these people to get. He wanted them to get that, right? Jesus's miracles are always about like addressing a physical need and also proclaiming a reality of God, right? So he addresses this physical need. They are fed. The bread is there. The rice is in their bellies. I mean, that concept is there. But also, there is a reality to what God is up to in the world that he wants to express as well. That God's mercy and forgiveness is there, that the bread of life, the fulfillment of God is part of us as well. And I love this language of soul food, that even after justice comes, even after everyone is fed, even after all of these things that we are working for as a congregation, even after the immigration system is reformed, we will still long for soul food. It doesn't end. Like that doesn't go away. Like God will still be up to things and active and a part of who we are, and God's mercy and grace and forgiveness will continue to push us and be within us and work within us and do all of these things. And I think that's a cool concept and an important underpinning of this story, right? That God, what you said, Pastor Rebecca, you said this in the Exodus text. God not only leads us through the wilderness, but transforms the wilderness into new life, right? Like that is as ancient of an idea in our faith tradition as anything, right? That we are constantly being led into new and interesting and exciting things that are oftentimes absolutely terrifying. And God speaks out of that wilderness, out of the cloud in the wilderness, right? So put your backs toward Egypt and look at the scary wilderness, because that's where you're being called, and that's where God is, what God is up to, and where you're going to find manna and quails and the bread of life and the water of life. That's where it's going to be. And so my story with that is, we're recording this on a Monday. So last night was our last Jazz in July concert. And at one point in time, Leah, our children, youth, and family minister, and I were standing there in the parking lot looking around and going, there are so many hundreds of people here, including literally dozens of families. Some of them we know, some of them we don't. I can't believe we don't have a giant table out to recruit for Seeds of Faith and confirmation and high school youth group. Oh my gosh, what are we doing? And we had this moment of like, we have to go get a table. We have to go make signs. We have to get a sign-up sheet. We have to do all of these things. And then we were like, wait, it doesn't have to be transactional. Like, you don't have to show up to a church event and be recruited for something, right? Like, we provided this awesome space to let people come and find community and experience soul food, right? Through ice cream bars and jazz and egg rolls. Like, that was soul food last night. It was gathering in the midst of the chaos of the world around us and being able to just experience peace and community. And that is cool. That is bread of life right there. That is stuff that doesn't fill your stomach, but it fills your soul. And if it's ice cream, it might also fill your stomach, but more so, it's soul food to be able to do that in the world. And I think that that's the sort of thing that is a call for us that never goes away. It's what Sparks was saying, that in Christ, by Christ, and because of Christ, we have this thing that we constantly can give to the world as it has been so freely given to us. And that because faith is active and actionable constantly in John's gospel, that we cannot help but continue to do and continue to live. So I don't have any idea what I'm going to preach on yet, but it's been fun to kind of walk through this bit of John together. So, and I really love Exodus. It's so nice to have text to connect. So, do you have any thoughts on that, Rebecca?
I do. I mean, you talked about soul food, and it was so much fun to have the trucks there, but that food led to the real food, which was being allowed again to gather. Different groups of people who didn't know each other, talking to one another, of the little children running back and forth and intermingling, of the beautiful music in one hand, the light breeze in another, but the gathering of the people, the talking to one another, the appreciation of the children. They had no difficulty when they were drawing and doing their little bead necklaces, but mostly when they were drawing. There were different families, different children, different ethnicities. It didn't matter. They were there, they were comfortable, they were protected. It was a real gathering. And that, for me, was the huge joy above and beyond the ice cream and the lovely food. It was the other food. It was the proper soul food. And it was phenomenal because of that. And I'm so glad you didn't get the tables, though it would have been lovely. What we saw was powerfully lovely.
Yeah. I agree. It was a good time. And I like that both and, right? That John sets up here in Jesus's words, that the bread leads to the bread of life, that the water in a bucket leads to the water of life. And I like that. I like that idea that the food trucks lead to the soul food.
Well, it was a reason, an excuse. And thank you for giving such a glorious context, because that makes it easier to step into and to say exactly what you just did.
Yeah, I think that's great. Awesome. Well, that's all I got for the text this week. It's going to be fun. Pastor Jules will be back on Sunday, and we'll be rocking and rolling here in worship on the 1st of August, because it's already the 1st of August. A couple of announcements, though, as we move ahead. Just a reminder, worship 9 o'clock on Sundays, online, in person. Come and hang out. We'd love to have you here or join us online. And make sure you comment on that online thread and on Bible Studies online thread, too. Let us know that you're here and ask your questions and be a part of this community. We are heading into our last Wednesday of Vacation Bible School on the 4th, I believe, of August, and that will be a great evening. That'll start at 5:30. We'll have drive-through communion from 5 to 6, circle time at 6. Pastor Rebecca will be leading up worship over at Norris Square starting at 4. And so we are around, we are here, we're doing many things and prepping for all of the stuff that's coming this fall too. So thank you for the ways you've been involved, and reminder that if you have any ideas about where God is calling us, be sure to let us know so that we can all be part of it together and bring some soul food into the world.
For we are the supporting cast, all of us. Thank you.
We are the supporting cast. You bet. All right. Thanks all. Thanks for joining us. Blessings to you and have a great day.